Welcome to Candybar, Antlerboy, a series where I, Mike Rapin, discuss the Netflix original series Sweet Tooth live on the I Read Comic Books Discord stage with anyone and everyone who wants to chat. Every week we'll be discussing one episode of the TV series and chatting about the comic of the same name by Jeff Lemire, originally published by Vertigo Comics. Now let's get into the show. This is episode 8, titled Big Man, 54 minutes long, 25 seconds. I'm joined by my regular 7-episode consecutive co-host at this point, Danny. Danny, thank you so much for being on the show yet again.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really enjoying it, and I think this is what it's all been building to, right? So we have to close out the season strong.
Well, yeah, I'm overwhelmed with emotion. This episode hit me in 500 different ways, right in the heart, and I needless to say, I cried. I cried multiple times. But I mean, the show, this episode started with probably one of the most anxiety-inducing conversations I've seen in a TV show in a while. Where they were just talking about two guys, they were, outside cleaning something in full hazmat suits, talking about the virus, and I was like, too soon, Netflix. I thought the whole show was a little bit too soon, and then we've got this conversation. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, like, I want to see more of how this show, I guess what the timeline of the show being made is, because the conversation these two people are having, like, it's something you would hear, I don't know, like, it feels like we've been hearing the same conversation from people all over the place, you know, recently. Mm-hmm. So the fact that this is happening at the same time, if it was written before, it's just a wonder how the writers really nailed that feel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from what we've seen in the show, and of course, shows aren't shot sequentially, but we've definitely seen a lot of people with masks. We've seen a lot of people that, like, specifically when Rana and Dr. Singh, they were living in the neighborhood, like, people were really quick to pull out masks and stuff. So that definitely feels more like a post-COVID kind of mentality. I'm guessing that this episode was not shot before that, at least. That's my guess.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think this I would assume there's a lot of post-production for a show like this. So
yeah.
But that was interesting. I do have on my notes vape. Ugh. Because that dude pulls out a jewel, and that's the reason he takes off his mask.
Yeah, oh my gosh. It's very much just like a how could you be so ignorant kind of situation, And of course, the guy's bit is that, oh no, this stuff that we're spraying is more dangerous than the chemicals. It's like, oh my gosh, guy, could you just not right now? Could you please not? Right. Which they punctuate that moment with Jeopard driving up in his giant car and hitting the dude with his truck. As his, wife that we find out we're meeting for the first time, Louisa, is having a baby. And this is the scene. This is the moment where Jeopard is in his most frantic, and we see him, freaking out about how do we get this kid in. It turns out that the military has taken over this hospital and they can't get in, but he's like, my wife is literally having a baby, and they manage to let him go upstairs, and it's a whole very frantic situation. I was very much on edge just in this whole opening bit of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, this all kind of stems back from the conversation that Jeopard and I think, was it Tony, had on the train?
Mm-hmm.
It may have been Tony. But yeah, they had a conversation where we know that Jeopard's story does not have a happy ending really with his family.
Right.
So just watching this and jumping into the fray like this, like, it just is very unnerving because in the end, like, something bad is probably going to end up happening. We don't know exactly what until we kind of get into it, but we know that this has no, we know where Jeopard is at the moment, so we know that his family's definitely not around with him right now.
Right. And I didn't say it, but full spoilers for episode 8 of Sweet Tooth. I don't think I said it yet, but by the way, we're getting right into it. We're gonna be talking about everything, folks. Which brings me to my next point, which is the line that Jeopard says that, to his wife, what if it's a ... like, very worried about it being a hybrid. His wife says, no, it'll be fine. And then later in the episode, in this same scene, his wife has the baby, and the baby comes, he goes to go see the kid. He asks the nurse, is everything okay? And the nurse doesn't give him an answer as whether or not it's a hybrid. And he goes and sees his kid, and he runs away. And I mean, that kind of is a little bit ahead of where the show goes at this point. But man, that was such a, sad scene of him being so upset and worried, not wanting to know, but also needing to know. And he's upset and angry, and he runs. Like, Oh man, it's so powerful. Like I don't know where they got all the acting skill out of this actor for this episode, but man, he's been hiding it pretty well this season, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, he was. I mean, the emotions that go through his face throughout the whole thing. Like you see a spectrum of going from worried and sad and maybe excited, but also still hesitant. The nurse just not giving him any information.
Oh my
I
gosh.
don't. That felt weird, but
Yeah.
I mean, it goes in and you finally see him go in and meeting his kid for the first time and
hmm
not being what he expected. Um, and then him having to go to the elevator and trying to figure out like, like does he want to keep being part of this or not?
hmm
There's a lot. Just a lot of emotions going on.
Yeah. I mean, and it's wonderful to see that like parallel story come up where, Gus and Bear, they're looking for Gus, and Gus, excuse me, and Jeopard says, "Hey, Bear, you have to stay here. I'm gonna go look for Gus." They have that little conversation of like, what if Gus was born way before the others? What if Gus was the first? What if Gus is the cause? And they like have to hush themselves about it because they're like, we can't put that on this kid. Like he didn't cause anything by being born. You can't blame him for being born. I liked how that really ties into the comic because that question comes up a lot in the comic. And I think it's something that they've hinted at in the show, and talked about even directly about like, oh, the hybrids started it. That's why everyone's getting the sick. And I think that it's interesting to see Bear and Jeopard kind of avoid that conclusion because they don't want to wish ill will on this kid who they both really care about. And, Jeopard coming out and finding Gus after Gus has gone on his little anger exploration, tour. And he starts to talk about Jeopard starts to talk to Gus about this sequence, and we don't know how much he reveals, but he does talk about how he lost his whole family, and we get that flashback of him in the elevator trying to figure out what to do. And then there's this wonderful moment where he runs into, who of all people, Dr. Singh, who's working in the maternity ward, because we knew that's what he did. Like, what I mean, I love when shows do that in ways that are pretty unpredictable. Like, I didn't think he was like Jeopard was going to run into Dr. Singh, and yet it happened, and it was so cool.
Yeah, I didn't think that was the same hospital, but I mean, it Dr. Singh shows up, and we know that Dr. Singh was there for a lot of it when the hybrids were around. But I think it gave Jeopard the one nudge what he needed to hear, or the things that he needed to hear to confront, or at least try to be with his family.
Yeah.
So that was very cool.
There was a line that Dr. Singh said in that moment of, you'll be surprised what you're capable of when it's for someone you love, and I think that, what a beautiful line coming from that character of all people in the show, like this guy who's going far and beyond to the point where he's lying by the skin of his teeth, to try to save himself and more importantly, his wife, and to see Jeopard hear that line, like he decides to go back upstairs where his wife and kid are gone now. And that same line now applies, I think, in the situation where he's taking care of Gus. Like, he loves this kid. He wants to take care of this kid. And it's really interesting to see, the very well crafted moments and lines in that scene. I really just love how it all like wrapped up really nicely. And again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of everything just here, but I love to see that through line of the story here as we get really into the mind of Jeopard in this episode. I mean, the episode's titled Big Man. What a great thing. I just love that so much.
Yeah, me too. I mean, like I said, the whole scene, everything is from beginning to end. It's kind of like a nonstop ride.
Yeah,
but it was nice to see. I really like when characters that we know kind of converge and everybody meets at the end. And that's what we've been expecting this whole season, right? Everybody traveling to the same destination, looks like.
Yeah.
For the most part, we're there.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, we do get the big clash of all of the characters because I think in the next scene, we end up seeing like Amy's last stand as she sent off all the hybrids, and now she's prepping the preserve, for doomsday. Essentially, she knows that the last men are here. They've shown up in tanks. We got the wonderful tank scene because, of course, if you're going to have a tank in a scene, you have to have it drive over a bunch of cars just to prove that it was a tank that could drive over cars, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger in the back driving over a bunch of cars. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you were wondering what Arnie was doing after the sick,
yeah, he was working for the last men just to drive the tanks.
that was cool. I'm glad this show, like, yeah, this show has a bigger budget than I think, especially with stuff like that,
Hmm.
and all the effects and everything. But I definitely was waiting for the confrontation with Amy and Abbott,
Oh yeah.
and the Last Man, because not only are we're trying to see what happens to the kids as they try to run away through the tunnels, but then also what's going to happen with Amy,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
as much preparation as she can do on her own, it's still like her against the whole army. But she seems like, with the help of the hybrids and Bobby in particular, like she
Yeah.
seems to be really well prepared for at least an attack that will distract and maybe give her some time to escape.
Hmm. I mean, and plus we got that incredible conversation between her and Abbott, over the microphones and stuff, and Abbott climbs up that fence. Like, something about that shot just floored me. Like, that imagery of Abbott standing up, he's got the big microphone and he's talking it, like, and just his overall look on top of the fence is so menacing, so just terrifying, and like just ultimately just a cool looking scene. I just love the way that whole interaction kind of spun out, because it felt so over the top but also absolutely perfect in every way.
Yeah, no, it plays out beautifully. It's a great conversation through the radios,
Hmm.
because it's weird because they're addressing each other, but also it's kind of an indirect thing.
Hmm.
But it just builds up, and then Amy asks, like, "Do you like fireworks?" And then we see that all the preparations that she's been doing uh, lead up to this big like blast of fireworks, and to try to do as much damage, I guess, and try to take care of as many of the last men as she can,
Hmm.
to give everyone a chance, because we see that that's when the kids finally decide they can keep moving forward, as they can kind of get away through the noise and all that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so that was a very cool scene. It looked great, seeing the fireworks just from the that big open shot of everything happening. It looked very cool.
Very cool. Yeah. I did like the little note that she left after they broke into her place and she had managed to escape, that just said happy extinction. Like,
Yep.
their whole conversation about how, like, this is the time of man is over. I was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, this is so cool. And
Yeah.
the fact that she's just like, I'm a human being, and yet I accept that these kids are the future. And I think, dealing with, hanging out with Wendy for so long, as well as a lot of the other hybrids, like, she understands that they are the future, that they are better adapted for this world that has fallen apart. And I just love that she was not necessarily trying to reason with the last men, but just saying, like, you guys need to accept the inevitable, just by putting the worm in their head. I'm guessing it's like she's hoping that she could convince maybe one or two others that she's right, and that there's nothing wrong with these kids, and that they're the future.
Yeah, and it's a complete 180 from the beginning of Amy's arc, where she's kind of a more meek character,
Hmm.
uh, but we've seen her now throughout these, mm, 8 episodes, just become this new character who's just kind of a total badass.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we've got the hybrids kind of moving through the sewer after the fireworks go off. They know that that's kind of their signal to run to wherever their next meeting place was. And I'm guessing that, it's kind of implied that they had a system set up where Wendy was going to go investigate and Bobby was going to go investigate, and then they'd find things. And there was a really nice moment that I saw, that I thought was just a nice touch in the show, where Wendy, she speaks to all the kids, but she also signs to them, which I thought was a really really smart way of portraying that not all these kids can necessarily speak, but they are capable of communication. And I think
Yeah.
there's kind of an implied thing in the comic that maybe some people can speak to the hybrids, or some of the hybrids can speak to each other, but we don't know how. I like that they gave it a manifestation, like an actual thing in the show, where Wendy is actually using sign language to communicate with them, to prove that, a lot of these kids, they aren't necessarily dumb, and they're not animals. They are just uneducated because they've been abandoned as hybrids. And I think that's kind of a thing we're going to see maybe more in the next season, because it is something that's kind of implied in the story of the comic, that the only reason these kids appear quote unquote dumb is because they were never given the chance to learn, and they were never taught speech the same way that a regular kid would be, or kids nowadays would be. So I just like that little note. I thought that was a really just nice way to portray that in the show.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I like that a lot. Uh, I do have my next note just says No, Bobby.
I was gonna say, yeah, that was the next thing I wanted to get to was that, Wendy and Bobby get caught. There's just this Bobby just being the most adorable character in the entire show.
Yeah. Like I want no harm to come to him, but then here we are.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, everybody gets put in cages, and there's kind of
right.
this implication that the rest of the hybrid kids get grabbed as well. And then we cut to Ronnie and Dr. Singh getting pulled off of a truck. The bags getting pulled off their head, and oh shit, they're at the preserve now. They kind of did like some time skipping around to make everything work, and man, to see them setting up shop in the preserve was kind of heartbreaking because that's the place that like was kind of this sanctuary, but also we start to see this set up for Dr. Singh where he has no choice but to be the person who has to find this cure. And I think what was great about that is that he talks to Abbott. Abbott's like, I knew that you were lying. I know that you were bullshitting me. Like, it's totally fine. You do whatever you can, but I expect you now to deliver.
Oh yeah, and we kind of get wind of like what Abbott's real plan is to
Oh my
use
gosh.
he doesn't want to save the world. He wants to control it by holding his boot over everyone by having being the only one with the cure. Which is a lot more sinister than I guess you can make an argument if he wants to save the whole world that yeah, he might have to get his hands dirty and he has, but he doesn't want to do that. He has no good intentions at all.
The line that I pulled out of the show was, find me enough doses so I can decide who lives and who doesn't.
Yep.
And underneath I just wrote, yikes.
Yes, exactly.
Dude, I mean, the more we find out about this character, every time he's in a scene, the more evil he becomes. Like, if you ever needed a more perfect bad guy, I dare you to find me one more that's more evil than this guy,
Yeah, no, it's hard. Like, I mean, I'm sure we could eventually get to somebody that,
Yeah.
he's been built up so well too. I think that's one of the best things about this season, that all the character arcs, they make sense, and sometimes it feels like things can get rushed, but this one, they've all been. It's like when you do a recipe that calls for cooking different things at different lengths of times, but then they all have to end up at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what this season feels like, and it feels like it was very successful in making sure everything, all the timing for everyone played out properly.
And I think to that point, like, we're starting to see like the fruition of a lot of those storylines too. And I think that some shows like Game of Thrones is one that I can think of that comes to mind first, of trying to tell multiple stories at once and having them intersect here and there. And I feel like this show definitely executed better. And I think that your analogy there is absolutely perfect, because like we see Dr. Singh kind of go from this kind of anxious but well-meaning person to this fractured character who is literally teetering on the edge of a complete breakdown, under the guise of wanting to save, not under the guise, but under the meaning of wanting to save his wife, right? Like, he wants to save his wife, but he knows he has to do this horrible thing. And it is a thin line that he is walking to not have a complete breakdown, my notes, I was talking about like how you see him kind of this, as the episode goes on, like there's just this wash of a lack of emotions that fall over his face, and I think he eventually interacts with Gus, and there's a really nice moment there that I do want to touch on. But at the end of this episode, all of the emotion and the worry and everything that was on his face is just gone, not in a bad acting way, but in a, like, his character was burying all of his feelings, knowing that if he didn't, he would go insane. And I think that stupendous acting on the part of what's his name, Adil Akhtar. Like, what a fucking what an ability is all I can say. Like, that dude's impressive.
Right, and the show has I feel like the show's bought enough goodwill towards Dr. Singh. Like, every episode they add a little bit something to be like, remember, he's kind of a good dude. Don't fully hate him.
Right.
Right, and then they, especially when you put him next to Abbott, you're like, oh yeah, this dude is not that bad. But we still haven't seen him do, up until maybe close to the end of the episode. And I guess we should talk about the conversation with Gus first.
Yeah. before we get too deep into the horrible implications at the end of this episode. I mean, we also got an incredibly emotional scene, with Gus and Jeopard. Jeopard's backstory had me just in tears, and because that was the other thing. As this episode goes on, there's a lot of jumping around that happens because they're wrapping everything up, and it's really, really well done. There's the scene where Jeopard sees his son and he runs away, and then he runs into Dr. Singh, and then he goes back up and the kid's gone. And there is this, we're kind of expected to understand that he's telling maybe bits and pieces of this to Gus as they're sitting there, because Jeopard goes out to find Gus. He finds Gus, who has fixed this radio in a plane and is told the preserve, hey, come get me, I'm up on a hill, which we know as the audience is not a good thing because Abbott has arrived. But as they're having that conversation, the Jeopard is breaking down a little bit, and Gus is like, okay, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That's really sad that your wife and your kid were taken away from you. And it's not that they were killed, it's that Jeopard went back and they were gone. And I think there is this kind of heavily implied thing that Jeopard doesn't, as much as he wants to let Gus go and he wants to let him be, he knows that he has this care about this kid. He cares for him. He cares about hybrid kids, even though he's probably done some bad shit in his past. He wants to do right, and Gus is giving him that opportunity by just being Gus. And he can't let Gus go because he let that happen once before. And I think it's a really beautiful way that they've done that parallel story there. And of course, as soon as we get this wonderful moment between the two of them. Jeopard gets shot and all hell breaks loose for the episode, which leads us to the other thing that you were talking about, Danny.
Well, I mean, just to kind of touch on that I didn't know what happened. As I was watching it, I didn't realize what had happened. Because we have this conversation. I was still kind of processing all the stuff the emotions that Jeopard had been, from the conversation with Gus. Mm-hmm. And then we hear the loud bang. Gus acknowledges it because, he calls it a loud boom or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then Jeopard just falls away. And then the way the scene was shot, I didn't realize that the angle from where the scene was shot, I didn't realize that where the cars came from, that I guess they could have shot Jeopard from that direction. I don't know. It was kind of weird. So I didn't really see why he would, I didn't realize Gus' hands were covered in blood till later.
Same. It was a little bit chaotic, but I think that might have been the point, to try to confuse you as well as the way that Gus was probably confused in the moment.
Yeah, no, I just have a note that says, did they kill Jeopard? Oh, shit.
But see, that's funny because my notes say, they shot Jeopard, son of a bitch. I love this and I hate this because I knew it was coming, right? I knew that, Abbott had to come get Gus. Again, you read the comic, that eventually Gus does get captured, and he does end up with a bunch of hybrids like he did in this episode. I just didn't know how it was all going to come together because I couldn't figure out what the timeline was. And of course, that moment kind of solidifies that everything's happening at the same time, which I thought was a really, really smart way to put all of that together. And Gus getting hauled away. Oh my gosh, his face it was so heartbreaking, and they just left Jeopard to die. And in my notes, I wrote, "Dude, there's still 20 minutes left in this episode." And I couldn't believe it. So much still needed to happen. And
in contrast with the comic, which I've only read volume 1, I like the changes that they made for Jeopard's character. I like this version a lot more than what we see in the comics. And you've read more, so maybe you'll see that maybe it eventually becomes more similar, but I'm not sure,
Yeah, Jeopard as a character he's kind of a bastard in the book, right? And he doesn't really soften up until later in the series. There is a lot of extremely sympathetic stuff to understand why Jeopard is the hard ass that he is, but it's definitely not clear in the first volume. And I think it maybe even takes till the second or end of even the third volume for you to really get to crack that shell on this character. But yeah, I do totally agree with you. I feel like the Jeopard in this book or in this show is more of a chip on his shoulder, so much as instead of a hard ass. And I think that makes him definitely more of a likable character than maybe even the guy in the comic book. The comic book guy you're kind of stuck with, and he's very harsh in a lot of ways. But I think this Jeopard is much more likable from the get-go, and he's still kind of a jerk, but not someone that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm sick of this dude's just meanness,
Right. Right.
But yeah, I think the other storyline that's happening here, kind of is like the C plot of the story, is Bear talking to Judy. You know, she gets a lot of facts and information from Judy because they just have like a heart to heart where Judy's like, "Hey, what's your actual name? No one's gonna actually name their kid Bear." And I guess her name is Becky. It reveals that her name is Becky and that she was adopted, and she talks more about her family. And then we come to find out that she was adopted, you know, and we knew that she was adopted, but we didn't know that she was adopted by a black couple who had another kid who was a hybrid who turns out to be Wendy ? Maybe.
No, I have two notes on that. The first one, because they break up this reveal in two pieces, right? The first one when she says we realize that she has her sister is a hybrid, so I just put hybrid baby, and then I have another one that says Wendy, when she shows the picture, when we see the picture of Becky as younger, and then with baby Wendy that we saw back in the first or second episode.
I mean, I have in my notes like the baby that was at the zoo was a little bit younger than the baby that they showed in the episode, but you know what? I'm not going to try to nitpick this show that hard. Either way, it was a cool reveal because like Bear as a character is not someone that's in the comic, right? So I was really wondering how they were going to even tie her in. I think she's a really good addition to the story. I think Gus and Jeopard is an interesting tale, but adding Bear to the mix as kind of like this young, angry kid kind of adds a little bit more, flair to the show in some ways, where Gus is given two very different but both well-meaning perspectives. And I like that. So it was interesting to see that they tied it back to her being related to Wendy, because I think that adds another layer of complexity to the story, which is great.
Well, and I really felt that Becky was getting kind of the short end of the stick on this episode, because everything was really focused on everyone else, except that obviously the show just kind of really managed to bring her back into the fold. Very surprisingly, but also in a way that, well, that's cool, and it makes sense. So yeah, it was very good. I'm glad that they're doing that, because it gives us it gives us more of a logical explanation of why Becky might still stick around.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and especially with there's kind of an implication that Jeopard's like, yeah, dude, like you don't have to hang out with us if you don't want to do this. And you could tell there's something more to it. And it was nice to see that, you know, the reason was she's looking for her sister, which I think is a really nice thing. And of course, in the meanwhile, she's also trying to fix this satellite phone that she found that belonged to Gus's mom. And, you know, in the last minutes of the show, we get a big reveal. But I guess let's talk about some of the last bits of this episode, then we'll talk about the big reveal at the end. Because I think the last thing that we get through is like, you know, Jeopard gets picked up by a mysterious figure who looks a lot like Amy, and it's revealed that it is Amy. You know, at the end, and the hybrid kids all get together, like with that scene that you wanted to talk about with Dr. Singh. I guess Gus and Dr. Singh have a whole scene together, right?
Yeah, it was great. It was, you know, like I think Gus has always been really smart. The character is really smart, so he's trying to make sure that, you know, he's been told, don't let them know that you can talk. And as Dr. Singh is getting ready to do whatever he's going to do, we see Gus, we see a candy bar, which is, you know, callback to pretty much everything that is Gus's character.
Yeah.
And then he whispers thanks, and Dr. Singh, that piques his interest. So, that was just, once again, very smartly written to have a reason why Gus is not the first hybrid that unfortunately goes through whatever's going to happen.
Yeah, that moment was super powerful, because I was like, oh no, this, like, how are they going to get out of this scene? You know? And I thought it was interesting, you know, Gus's face, I said it before in previous episodes, but I think the kid that they cast for this show is perfect, because he looks young, he's very innocent, he's childlike, he's very adorable, and, you know, in that moment where he's trying to be quiet, like his eyes are really big, his face is really small, and it's just everything about him makes him look like a cute little animal, right? And his eyes darting back and forth between Singh and the candy bar, was just great. And the fact that, he Sing hands him the candy bar and Gus takes it and says, thanks, like really, really quietly. Just that look on Sing's face after he's kind of been broken by Abbott. Abbott has basically said, hey, dude, you better figure this shit out or I'm killing your wife, Yeah. To see like him have this spark of interest and confusion and joy all at once, as if there was something more to this whole scenario, was just beautiful. Like, I can't speak the praises of this actor enough. Like, he's done a fantastic job of being all over the place with various emotions in multiple episodes. I think he's stupendous for this role.
Right.
Yeah, I really, really liked how that all played out.
Yeah, I do have one quick note here that says, everyone yells at Johnny.
Oh, yeah.
So, because Abbott obviously yells at him, and then now Sing, when he gets him to, I guess, get a different hybrid. So I guess poor Johnny. But I like his character. I feel like there's gonna be a lot more to him in the future. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think we really got to do like a comic retrospective on the show because Johnny is a very crucial character in the series. In some points of it, and I think knowing what I know from having read like later volumes of what you have, like volume 2 and 3 and 4, Johnny is crucial to some of the story bits, and I think his character is being portrayed in such a genius way because he's not necessarily a bad guy, but he works for bad people. He's clearly kind of a dummy. Maybe he's just got a good heart, on him. And he just happens to work for bad people. Now, the question is why? The question is, what is his purpose? Why do people keep him around if everyone's yelling at him all the time? And I think the big reveal for that will come later. But I think we're definitely going to be seeing more of Johnny. And I'm very excited to see how that all plays out because he's such a curious little character in this whole story. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My one theory right now is nepotism. So I feel like Johnny's related to somebody important, maybe.
Okay. Okay,
we'll see.
I like that theory. We'll see how it plays out next season. Let's see. So, then we get to the scene where Dr. Sing is going at the lizard kid after Gus gets thrown in this cage, which
the horror scene of the episode.
Yeah, like that's a bone saw, dude.
The camera just focused in. We saw the bone saw a couple times as they were setting up, but then the camera just like fixates on it. And then we see Dr. Singh grabs it, and then Abbott's there, like in the gallery looking.
Yeah.
This whole setup, man.
Yeah, I know that Netflix has marketed this as a wholesome show, but it gets pretty dark, especially this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole bit was tough. And the hybrid kids look so interesting. Like, I think, this is definitely an episode they saved a lot of their budget for. We had a tank, we had fireworks, we've got a bunch of hybrid kids in makeup, we got, all sorts of different stuff, a helicopter scene, or not a helicopter, we got an airplane scene that had to be set out in this giant plane. I thought that they definitely spent a lot of money on the episode, so I think it looks great for that reason, and I loved it, because especially near the end of the episode where we see Gus, alone and scared, and then all of a sudden all the hybrid kids come out of the dark, including Wendy, and they all go up and hug him, like, clearly lots of makeup being used, lots of kids being on set. It's very, very interesting. I thought that was really nice because there's a line that the narrator has, because family is what we make it, each one of us together. Like, I was fucking fully bawling at that point because I was like, this is so sad, but I also love it so much.
Yeah, no, I don't know that we talked about it enough, but James Brolin, like, as the narrator, he's been so good throughout the whole series.
Absolutely.
Like, he adds just enough gravitas to make it seem like, serious stuff is going on, but also the tone that feels kind of like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So it's a good balance there.
Yeah, and I think, I have my theories as to what the James Brolin is and what he's going to be in the end and stuff, and what the whole narration means, but I won't spoil it. And I think if you read the comic, you'll probably know what I'm thinking as well. But it's really going to be really interesting to see what happens. I was supposed to send you an email, I just realized, for the last episode of the show, and with a question, and I don't remember what it was, and because I don't think I actually sent the email. I think I drafted it and I don't know where it is. So for all you listeners out there, I apologize in advance. We'll find it. We'll get it answered for another episode.
When we do the comic retrospective, maybe we'll revisit.
Yeah, we'll find it. But let's talk about the last scene in this episode, though, the big reveal of everything, because the last thing. Oh, go ahead.
All right, right before that, yeah. when all the kids, like we're talking about Brolin narrating about the family and all the kids hug Gus, and like that really got me. Like it was a very emotional scene, and
Yeah.
it kind of brings back this journey that Gus has had of like having his dad and then losing his family and then finding another family and kind of losing that family again, but in the end, like he finds his own too, like,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
just immediately embrace him. Like, yeah, that was very sweet. It's what I feel keeps this show from like going too dark. It's moments like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean there is like a still it's so bizarre because they can have those scenes like with the bone saw and the
Yeah,
the iguana kid, and then they cut to scenes like this, and I'm just like, okay, there's still a lot of heart in this show.
right,
It's not grim. Or grim, like The Walking Dead or a lot of those premiere dramas that rely on horror and stuff.
right,
There's still a lot of heart and a lot of soul to this show that is carried by all of the scenes with Gus, right? And I think we'll probably see some stuff with Gus is dealing with some harsh shit, but I also think that his character will still bring some light to those darker scenes,
right.
So yeah, that last scene that we get with the satellite phone, I really like that scene in particular because not just was it a callback to Alaska or whatever, but there's a lot of stuff that's just little droppings from the comic, little bits and pieces that exist in the comic. And I love the way that this show continues to take pieces from the puzzle that is the comic and kind of reassemble them in a way where you go, oh, this isn't the same exact puzzle, but it is the same picture. And I think it's a really smart adaptation in that there are pieces like the boat and there's a diary and there's like this heat map of this boat and all this other stuff. And I think that they've taken a lot of really interesting parts from the last 2 volumes of the book and dropped them into the show as hints and future threads that I'm really excited to see pay off, because at the end of this episode, we get the big reveal, which was, Danny, I mean, what did you think?
I need when Becky was trying to use the phone, I definitely figured out who the person she was going to be calling out to.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect them to be where we see them at the end of the credits.
Okay.
So if you want to describe what happened, and then we
Yeah.
can fully dive into
I
it.
mean, like I said, we see the little bits and pieces of the boat and a map, and there's like this. It's clearly snowing outside, and we're back in Alaska, and somebody comes running inside, and who is it? It's fucking Birdie, and
Yeah.
I was floored. I definitely did not see that being the reveal at the end of this season as the big plot hook for season 2, because in my mind, I figured Birdie was gone, right? The same way that Gus's dad was gone. And yet here she is, and that means there's still hope. I mean, I got 1,000,001 questions about where things could even go from there with that conversation, because she picks up the phone, she goes, "Who is this? Who are you?" Like, what the hell? Like, season 2 is going to be insane if they're bringing that thread in,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it opens up so many questions, but not in a way that makes me upset, but just in a way that makes me really look forward to whatever's in the future. I feel like the season gave us enough things gave closure to enough things. Whereas like this is just a cool like, hey, we gotta go back to where it all started to figure out how to get rid of this thing or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To find the real cure. Not because they keep mentioning that hybrids and the sick are 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not so much that they are the solution one thing to the other or the cause one thing to the other. So I'm very excited to see where that story goes. I'm expecting maybe an episode in the next season where we just kind of focus on Birdie's story from the house with Judy
Mm.
to wherever she is now in Alaska to the moment where I even can see we would just see that scene with the phone call from the other side where we see her run into the house.
Yeah.
Wow.
That could be, it could be very interesting. Yeah, man, I was floored. I couldn't believe it because I genuinely didn't think that character was coming back. So very excited to see what more we can see with that. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have any final thoughts on the show? Any final thoughts on the season at all?
I mean, I definitely very much enjoyed this season. I think, like I said, we got enough closure to a lot of stuff. One thing I did have on my notes that is kind of just sitting there. In one of the episodes, it felt like Abbott was searching for a bear, or at least a
Yeah.
girl. Now that I think about it, maybe he could have been looking for Tiger um,
Oh.
instead. But I don't know. Like they just. But either way, the season didn't pay that off at all. Like they kind of set it up early, and when we met Abbott, and that's about it. Like that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I feel like is just out there sitting like with no answer for now.
Yeah, I feel like I remember that as well. Maybe we'll find out more. I mean, again, there's maybe more characters that are going to get revealed, because like if you compare the comic to the show, there's some characters that haven't been brought up and or have been replaced by other people. So maybe there's more.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to see if that comes up again, because I feel like if they do bring it up, they're going to have to do a full explanation again. It won't be like if you remember from last season. Like there's no way. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I guess. But otherwise, I feel like there haven't been a lot of other plot bits that I wanted wrapped up. Like maybe I expected a little bit more out of the whole Tiger character. Like maybe that whole little army that Bear built will come back in future episodes.
Yeah.
But I don't imagine that. I didn't think they needed to touch on it any more this season than they did. They just had to get Bear out of there and kind of leave that open and dangling so that if they needed to, they could pick it up later.
Yeah, for sure. I'm like I said, I'm very satisfied. It's rare that a season one of a show kind of writes themselves into a very good spot for the next season like this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just kind of a really nice, just everything's neatly wrapped up, but it's also like, hey, here's the invitation for our next event. Make sure to come back.
Totally agree with that. I feel like that's usually like a season 3 or season 4 kind of situation
Right.
for shows. So yeah, I'm definitely agree with you there. And again, I feel like this show probably doesn't even need to be more than 2 or 3 or 4 seasons, right? This is kind of one of those things where like we know kind of where the show has to go in some capacity, at least as someone who's read the comic. If you read the comic, again, I keep saying that you should all go out there, read the comic. It's going to spoil some things, but it's also going to make you excited about the differences. And yeah, I think that if you've read the comic, you know where things are going to go. If you don't, maybe this feels endless, but I also think like a story like this doesn't need to go on forever. And with child actors, you don't necessarily need to watch them grow up over 10 years in a show. A couple of years is all that you need. So I'm hoping that they have like a good beginning, middle, and end, and maybe the show will just get wrapped up in 3 or 4 seasons, and we'll have like a really nice, cohesive TV series that doesn't feel like it's dragged out by any means. So fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, for sure. Same. I mean, that's what I hope to.
Well, cool. I think that's everything that I've got over here. So I guess thank you everyone for listening to the show, listening through all 8 episodes. Once fingers crossed, we're assuming season 2 is coming out. Once that comes out, maybe Danny and I'll try to get back on the horse for this one and do a whole nother season of Candybar Antlerboy. But for now, Danny, where can people find you on the internet if they have any more burning questions about Candybar, Antlerboy, Sweet Tooth, or anything else?
Sure. And if I finish the comic, I'll let you know. So maybe we can.
Oh yeah, maybe we'll do a bonus episode before. Yeah.
But you can find me on Twitter at Echo Spider for my personal stuff, or you can check out at Next Issue Pod for all the things on our podcast where we talk comics, movies, all kinds of random stuff.
And they make a zillion YouTube videos, which is awesome if you ever need coverage on pretty much anything out there. It's great. I love it. You can always follow me at Mike Rapin on Twitter. You can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. In this episode first premiered on Patreon, where you can find all sorts of stuff from I Read Comic Books, the IRCB Movie Club, the Saga of Saga series, all about the book series Saga, Giant Days of Our Lives, which is all about the full 14-volume series Giant Days, and so much more. You can check that out at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast. Join the IRCB Discord community at ircbpodcast.com/Discord to join future episodes of Candybar Antlerboy, or listen to other episodes of I Read Comic Books as we record them live. And we hope that once we do season 2, you too can come on the show and talk Sweet Tooth with us. The IRCB Candybar logo is done by TheSamDS. Music for this episode is Beautiful CS by Robert Farmer. I want to say thanks again to Danny for doing this entire season with me. It's been ups and downs and all over the place, so thank you so much, and thank you to everyone out there who listened. You're the best. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.